as well. Perfecto. Hey guys, girls, ladies and gentlemen. Hi Steve.
Isaac.
Hi Isaac. Nice to meet you again. Welcome to WAO number 7, I think. We are one to some degree. We are one, essentially. I'm really pleased to have Steve. Shall I say Snoopman as well?
You can.
Yeah, Steve Snoopman Edwards in the podcast today. Very exciting, very intense times for many, many reasons. And I'm pretty happy that we found some time to have a conversation and see what it is. So welcome to another podcast of authenticity, truthfulness, to what you believe, to how you feel, to how you conduct yourself in this world, in the human experience, which can be sometimes these days extremely overwhelming, and it's really hard to navigate. I find it. I don't know. What about you? So welcome, and thank you for coming and having some time. I met Steve a few weeks ago in a little event that we have done. We danced a little bit to release all these overwhelming emotions that I just described. And we ended up having a quick chat. I was never exposed to what Steve is doing. And then since I invited him to be part of this conversation podcast, I had actually a look at what Steve is doing. I wrote some notes. I often don't write some notes. But when I looked into what Steve is doing, I was like, oh shit, there's lots of stuff to cover. So where do we start? And by the way, Steve was kind of inconveniently taking his hat off, which I really liked. Great hat, by the way.
Hey, thanks.
So we're going to talk about different things, about what we're passionate about, what we lack of passion, and we need to talk about it sometimes as well. And I remind you to really kind of have amazing feedback and comment. And when I say amazing, it doesn't need to be positive, but it needs to be a beautiful in terms of how we convey the message. So even if it's a critical feedback, it can be a way in which we can actually discuss this rather than make a judgment and say that someone is not credible because they think this way or another. I'm more interested in having conversation about the content rather than about the stigma of someone according to a viewpoint of someone else. So let's talk about the content or the information that someone is providing, and rather than, oh no, this person was this and that, so now I don't want to even look at the information he's providing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you find it so easy these days that there is no time to have discussion, obviously, because it's so easy just to kind of say, no, that doesn't work. These guys are too crazy. I'm not even looking at the stuff. Which sometimes I do that as well, because someone needs to be extremely crazy for me to say, oh shit, I'm not going to even go there. But in many cases, there is some really key points that people talk about that can actually allow conversation to happen. You know, they have a bit of merit in them, even for the sake of having a discussion. And I find these days, it's straight away easy to label, straight away easy to stigmatize, and then avoid those tough conversations because they are tough, and we are in tough times of many challenges. How do you deal with that? Because you've been to media quite some times now, right? And you're doing your own thing. So how do you deal with kind of ongoing things like that? And by the way, this kind of no disrespect if I'm sipping my tea / coffee.
I observe a lot, and I sometimes I join in a discussion on social media. I try to just be gentle. Sometimes I write an overly long answer and then I go later, it's a bit over the top. But it's what I find is happening is people's there's memes getting triggered in people's brains, neurons, and a lot of that, it's being placed there by through the mainstream media, even through the independent media, and what's behind it is it's a lot of political strategy and political consultancies and some very big companies and big governments that create narratives so that by the time something becomes big for people and they're all discussing it all at once, those things have been workshopped for a long time, and either in exercises or at think tanks, or by political strategy consultancies.
Yeah.
So, and all of that happens behind the scenes, so people don't see it when it suddenly something becomes like a global news story. They don't see what led to that.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
we don't know the back end story of anything, right? We just get the what's being presented.
Yeah.
Regardless of what media you're looking at, right? So it's always the fact of we don't really have the awareness of it. One, we're not physically there as well to start with. Okay, so can something happen in Japan, like the assassination of the ex-prime minister, for example? We weren't there, so all we can see is something on TV, and what they're going to tell us. What's the backstory of that? Who is the guy that shot the prime minister? What's his background? Why he's done that? What's the interview that they've been conducted about him? So we will never know all this really kind of information because we're not part of it. So there is always the media is limited in terms of how we convey the message to others and how credible this message is, right? And it's really hard these days to discern.
Yeah, and so then that's where investigative journalism comes in.
Does that even exist these days?
Well.
What does that mean, investigative journalism? Wait a minute, sorry. Thank you, Prime Minister, for letting me know what to write. Okay, shall I paint it something slightly different with my flavor? I'm not allowed. Okay, thank you. Is it that investigative journalism? Not so much.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a stenographer. That's why looking elsewhere. If you've got the same narrative coming at you from all channels, then I would hope people would maintain their skepticism, because when you see that happening all at once, for me, I've noticed that at probably three key times in the last 20 years when I've seen like big chunks of the Western media in particular, all throw a particular narrative, and the fear each time was palpable, and so those three times, one was 9/11, September 11, 2001, and
put the date, to be honest with you.
I know.
Fuck.
Yeah, it's their emergency dial number in America.
That's right.
Yeah.
And other people were born in this day, in 9/11.
Yeah. And I remember seeing, so to go into that, and a bit about me. It's a way of talking a bit about me. When I saw, those towers coming down, I was looking at it going, on the day, that looks like controlled demolition, because those are solid towers, and they were just collapsing. Even though the damage was asymmetric, they were falling symmetrically and coming down far too quickly. And I said to my flatmate at the time, who didn't watch any media because he's a complete hippie, and I said, it looks like controlled demolition, and he goes, what's that? And I said, well, there's been all these news stories through the 90s, particularly from the mid-90s onwards, all these news stories showing controlled demolition of apartment blocks and the likes. And I said, they look like they've been timed by computer-driven explosives. And he goes, ooh, and I said, well, it would be interesting to see what the FBI comes up with, and testing, doing forensic testing, for steel, the rubble, and the concrete. 5 days later, I see that the narrative had started, shifted to, as soon as the body recovery and rescue stage is over, get into the cleanup stage. And I went, the fix is in. They're not actually going to, forensically test the site and do a full to make sure that their narrative they'd already seeded, if Osama bin Laden was actually correct. So that's called counterfactuals, when you actually test your theory against what is the evidence, literally in this case, on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't do that. And so the evidence, since there's plenty of counter evidence since of this American deep state, that was at the forefront of planning that. And you can only get away with such, it's an epically brazen event. You can only get away with that if you've got control of all the investigative authorities.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so, I when I saw that, I was already aware that there was this transnational deep state and led by this American deep state. So I saw a really good documentary in 1998 by John Barber called "The Assassination of President John F. Kennedy," the Jim Garrison tapes, and I concluded at the end of that, because the Jim Garrison, for context, was the district attorney in New Orleans who brought the only prosecution case against some of the conspirators, including Clay Shaw, who was a former Office of Strategic Services, operative during World War II, which was the forerunner of the CIA. Anyway, the point being was that I concluded at the end of that documentary that the CIA, the FBI, and the Dallas Police, and the Secret Service, and people in the White House were part of that conspiracy. So, and the cover-up. And so by the time, I concluded that, there was still a criminal group at large, and like any criminal group, they'll go on to plan bigger and bolder things.
I think JFK one time had a speech in which he mentioned secret societies.
Yeah.
And people can hear it.
Yeah.
Basically,
it's online.
It's online. It's a JFK
secret society speech.
Secret society speech.
Yeah.
Which seems to be really odd as well at the time. So I mean, like,
he was aware of the forces that he
was aware. And I feel many people that are aware of the forces ending up basically either disappearing or being called like crazies, like I don't know, I'm really into UFOs, for example, and the discrepancies and the lies around that as well. For 70 years we were told that we are crazies, it's only air balloons and blah blah blah, there is nothing out there. And then how convenient in the last 2 years since the pandemic started or whatever, both CIA, NASA and Pentagon released official documents and footages and saying, there were some stuff that we're not sure what it is, and pilots say there is the famous kind of thing when they follow, a visual or footage of something like that. And there is the story of Bob Lazar, which was a scientist in Area 51, according to him. He's been in a few podcasts with Joe Rogan and a few others. And I watched him kind of in several interviews from back in the 80s when he actually exposed some of the stuff. I don't know, I feel he's actually more credible than any other agency that I've heard them saying anything else. So, I mean, like, it's such a powerful entity, right? That it seems that along the history, no one could stood against it. From JFK, for example,
right?
From the story of the Twin Towers, and as soon as you challenge a narrative, you're easily going to be labeled by, oh, you crazy, you this, you that. And it's funny because I feel like in day-to-day conversations, people often don't really trust politicians, right? Or entities like that. They feel they're not really in solid good heart at most times. Sometimes we are led to believe that they are. But when it comes to challenge something, all of a sudden that disappears and people straight away, oh no, you're crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, like, I feel like psychologically we don't want to be challenged, that there is something that is not great. And it's not great. It's sometimes with sinister, evil agenda that we're so scared of it that we'd rather not know about it and pretend business as usual, so we can still go to movies, cook some food at home, have lovely kind of vacation somewhere. And I mean, like, will it be even possible to have open conversations about this? You know, like 60 years later, I think in Trump presidency, he demanded to release some documents about JFK, for example.
Yeah, and then he
he
submitted to the FBI. Said
backed off.
They told me I couldn't.
That's right.
And it's like the final 1,500 documents, and it's like, well, they would be the juiciest, you know.
Exactly.
But you know, research has already figured out quite a lot.
That's right.
Oliver Stone's latest documentary on that, called JFK Revisited. It's quite good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't
he
watched
interviews, you know, some key authors, and like it's packed. And yeah, it's a good documentary.
Okay.
So he basically revisits it after he made the JFK film, which was based on John Barbar's documentary, which I mentioned at the beginning.
So that's one time.
That's one strand.
Kind of strand. So the 9/11 got you to realize, wait a minute, I live in times that I'm myself part of that sort of history unfolding in front of me. Right?
Yeah.
And that was quite big because it changed many things in the way we conduct surveillance, in the way we treat people, right?
Yeah.
It was then easy to implement.
That opened up massive. It basically it rejigged the setback. It reset the setback. It reset the setback that the intelligence agencies endured in the mid-70s when there was all these Senate investigations into NSA, the FBI, and the CIA, and so 9/11 they reset everything again. So what people need to understand is that every decade. So I'm getting this from Professor Peter Dale Scott, who has studied deep state events from JFK through to 9/11 and a lot in between, including Watergate, the Oklahoma City bombing, BCCI Bank, and after Watergate, the October surprise at the end of the 80s. So anyway, basically, what I'm saying is that what he recognizes is a reset event every decade of America, and therefore the world, because America's the leading superpower.
Yeah.
And so
leading the free world.
The free world. Well, you've got to bomb people into freedom, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, the point being is that I once I learned that, I was looking out for when's the next reset going to happen, because after I learned that, I went right. So the big reset at the beginning of the 2000s was 2001, and then as it clicked over into 2010, and further on,
financial breakdown, right?
Financial breakdown.
You even wrote a thesis about it.
Yeah. So that was the second event where fear was palpable in the world. Yeah. That I noticed, and then so as the 2010s got along, all my friends that are aware of this, we were going, what's the next reset going to be, and how are they going to pull it off? They're going to have to pull off something with a good cover story, because as I said in my thesis, they haven't resolved the causes of the financial crisis, and this financial system is fragile, and
why is it fragile, do you think?
Well, it's fragile because it's debt based.
You mean it's not real? It's imaginary concept.
Well, like literally the dynastic banking families of the world that own the global banks. That they've created a system where they can literally create credit, out of thin air and loan it to governments, because
and to individuals.
And this is the reason, like a key reason for, of why over the last 300 years that these banking families, military and intelligence families, have accumulated power through war to make governments beholden to them through public debt, and to borrow off them, essentially through the cover of having a central bank. So people need to ask themselves, how come our governments, our treasury borrows, and who do they borrow off? They borrow off the central bank. It's like, well, why do they need to borrow off the central bank if the government owns a central bank? And so then you start getting into like this money circle of how it actually works. In the case of the United States, the Federal Reserve is a privately owned cartel.
That's right. Also in the UK.
Yeah. And so what that means is, you know, if you actually had a monopoly board that really showed how it really worked, you know, you would have, you know, so the central banker would be in the corner, but as a player, if you're you know, like a really, you know, astute player of Monopoly, as you go around, you'd make sure you'd buy the JP Morgan Square, JP Morgan Chase Square, the Citibank, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, and because in that game of Monopoly, owning those banks would mean you own shares in the Federal Reserve Bank of America. That is essentially how it works.
Yeah.
And then if you're the JP Morgan Chase owners, you get a guaranteed 6% dividend every year on the profits from the US Treasury paying off public debt to the Federal Reserve.
Yeah. It's a great scheme.
It's outrageous. It's outrageous.
And you know, sometimes I feel that we forget that it's all man-made. And I'm really specific about men, masculine, male, male. And why it's really important, because we have been constructed our society based on patriarchal agendas in a way. I feel like, you know, female, they have beautiful traits, which both male and female, we both have this feminine and masculine in us. But obviously, if you're a male, you possibly have a bit more than the other. And I mean, masculine energy created the very systems in which we work with at the moment. Take financial, religion. It's all beautifully man-made imaginary concepts, and the only valid, we know that because we give value to that. If you don't give value to something, it's nothing, right? If I decide that Facebook is nothing and no one is going to use it, it's nothing. So as, I don't know, Volvo, or so as anything else, you know. I think Yuval Harari, in his book, the history of Homo sapiens, touches about these imaginary concepts in which we live by. Right. And we saw harnessing them to the degree that, you know, when I was born, I felt financial system is like from the gods. Yeah. You know, it's just like, sure, it's what, how can you question that? And I remember watching Zeitgeist the first time. Yeah. And then I was like, oh, okay, I've always had some suspicious about all of these things from the gods or whatever that is. Yeah. To form my own identity and my own, I would say, intuitive thinking, not only intellect thinking, which often is really limited. Intuitive thinking allows us to question stuff. Intellect thinking allows us to follow stuff sometimes, and not necessarily question.
Those city-state cults, they were essentially the world's first franchise.
That's right. Right? And it's not that the current financial system is not old. It's like a few hundred years, the way it is, roughly, right? We had all sorts of forms of this controlled, centralized system. So that's not new, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it had an ancient world, you know, system.
The Romans and
and then Sumeria, they had a credit system. But, the credit revolution really came along in the first 100 Years' War. Yeah. So the end of feudalism, and then that was the rise of commercial capitalism.
Okay.
And so because the Knights Templars established this international credit system, which was put very simply, you know, you had your bag of money, you know, at the beginning of a trip.
Yeah.
And you'd, you know, go along these roads, you know, say a pilgrimage. Or a traveling business trip, you get credit for how much, you know, gold and silver coins, you know, you handed in, and then you could spend that along the way, you know, stay at the hotels and you know, get your horse supplies and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. And
so that was the first international credit system.
Okay. When was that?
That was, well, so during the first 100 Years' War was 1300 to 1430.
Okay.
Yeah. Then the second 100 years. This is quite important because 100 Years Wars. Because what I say in some of the stuff I've been writing is that we're in the third 100 Years War still, which began in 1899 with the Boer War.
Yeah.
This is British secret elite planned World War One, and their test, and they needed the Boer War because that gave them access to a war chest with the gold and the diamonds. And so a 100 Years War is always fought when there's major transformations in the world system happening. So the first one was the end of feudalism and the beginning of nation states and commercial capitalism. And then the second 100 Years War was 1650 to 1815, and so then that was
with the big London fire was
that was
some degree.
So it had happened. That 100 Years War kicked off, like the English Civil War was occurring, and then this whole massive war to reconquer the core, which was France, and then that was what it was essentially fought over. Napoleon ended up reconquering the core area, but really it was to bring through mercantile capitalism, and then that got overtaken by industrial capitalism, and then the third 100 Years War. In that war, it was monopoly capitalism given away to finance capitalism, and now we're in the process of global techno-feudalist capitalism,
which takes place at this very moment.
How
exciting! You can say that you are part of it, and you maybe can say that you're not only part of it, you have the chance to reinvent and reimagine how things are at the moment. So maybe there is a time now, I don't know, 200 or 300 years ago, I think we had a lack of awareness, we had a lack of ability to access information, and most of all, to connect and communicate between people, right? People, Homo sapiens is the most successful organism on this planet because we're really doing well in large groups and organization of stuff. And now we have a chance to reorganize and reimagine how things are. Now, I know it's not going to be easy because habits, I know that for myself, habits are really hard to change. Comfort, laziness is something that humans are really kind of good at because we don't want to be challenged. It's really hard to be challenged. It requires from us energy. It requires from us to get out of our comfort zone, to get out of the house, to stand for something that you believe in. And I believe that there is, I feel that there is time now that things can be shifting in a different way. Unlike previous times in history where we allowed things to unfold, and then often it got into a destruction to some degree, wars, etc., blah, blah, blah. And then from these wars, something happened. But often it was dictated by the ones that had the control of everything. So we still kind of, for example, revolutions along the history. None of them were really successful. All they did is removing the one, or whatever that is, the persona in which we didn't want to anymore, but the very old system still the same, just shifted it, right? So instead of spin,
it's the same paradigm.
It is,
but it's just who gets to control a new system.
That's right.
So it's, and those revolutions. There's a really good book on that called The Secret History of the West by Nicholas Hager. Nicholas Hedger. He's an English historian, and he covers this 550-year period of these major revolutions, and shows that there's 4 distinct stages, and that there are 4 distinct character archetypes that occur in those revolutions
along the history.
And they're a horrendous history, and either side fighting just do horrendous things to each other. And then you end up with a new controlling system, and humanity's not free anymore again.
Which
that's the problem. And so what you're speaking to is we have an opportunity amid these incredibly destabilizing times to articulate, work together, and strategize, mobilize, and plan some transformative systems, structures, parallel structures,
parallel structures. I like that.
Yeah. And some ways of living that are really gets to because you can argue about what systems are going to be correct and all those kinds of things. And people come at it with their ideological baggage or backgrounds, whatever, and really the challenge for us is to basically it gets to who we are as human beings and opening our hearts, because we can come up with some amazing system and then we end up fighting in groups about it, and it's just like everyone brings their ego into the room.
Yeah.
And so the challenge was, we all do it. And so our challenge is to do it. is to do it, but not try and bring all our baggage.
Is it
meet
possible?
Well, I think it's possible to meet people afresh, and listen, and have conversations, and not try and win every conversation. It's like it's a good thing to practice. Because I recognize that in myself. Like I write away and put something out and put my references on it, and then you meet new people, and I meet people who just totally I don't agree with, or they wouldn't agree with me, and I don't even some of those times I don't even really talk about what I do. I just ask lots of questions because I want to understand how someone else views the world or what they know, because everyone knows different things, and by asking good questions you learn more. And
for me is actually how we can reimagine stuff and action that, rather than what you mentioned now, having an ongoing discussions that often I feel are more ego driven and viewpoints to be shown because we want to be acknowledged. And I feel like we in times that we require from us to just go for it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And try stuff.
We do,
because otherwise we're going to be in discussions while the other guys are going to implement stuff, and they have power to implement that.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
So I mean, like, I'm actually not in space that I want to have like years of discussions, endless discussions, and I'm part of different things that are it's tiring. Actually, how can we move on from that a little bit and be like, how can we create some point of agreement and action that? Is it possible?
Well, okay, so I think maybe a good way of, broaching that. Like I agree that, people need to form groups who, can see, like have a good sense of what's occurring, that there is this deliberate destabilization of, the world basically going on right now as the powerful factional groups reset the world in their favored directions that they want to take the world. That I think people who can see that need to form parallel structures, and so by that they're groups, they're institutions, they're systems that perhaps on the surface appear to be going along with what's going on, but at the same time there's other community support structures within those parallel structures that keep a community running, because let's face it, we've got what the like all the major and significant governments of the world, when they all magically went along with these pandemic measures at the beginning of 2020, I mean, people need to ask themselves, like, when have you ever seen all the world's major and significant governments all go along with the same program, more or less? You could quibble over what particular, nuances of that were, but they all went along with it. And without any of the major transnational, corporations and their CEOs publicly having arguments about it. When have you ever seen that? Shut down whole segments of your economy. And, it's like, it should make people skeptical of what's occurred. Because as soon as that happened, I was going, holy shit, they've pulled this reset, and that is just going to cause major supply chain issues throughout the world, and it's going to hit the poorest people the hardest, and in the poorest countries the hardest, because things are just going to not get manufactured, and then when you've got parts of machines and transport breaking down and businesses going under left, right and centre, how's the food still going to get produced, let alone made, and transported and everything else? And that's what they set in motion. So then people need to ask, why would they do that? So my answer to that is, when you have every industry in the world, particularly across the West, is dominated by massive transnational corporations that own them, you're looking at every industry is a cartel, and they've been allowed to do that because governments are being politically captured over time. And so cartels, they look after their own interests, and so they have a strategy to transform the planet and take it on this high-tech trajectory where people get replaced in jobs with AI and robots, and more wealth, power and control accumulates upwards. And so that means that they can buy up the fallen small and medium-sized businesses dirt cheap, and they're able to do that because the credit has been super cheap, and the richest corporations and the banks that that own, for instance, the Federal Reserve System, they get access to that cheap credit first.
Of course,
so it's near free. it's like 0.1%, and then of course they can make super profits, and hide behind literally tens of thousands of brands, making it look like there's this competition.
Of course,
but no, plenty of us have seen in the last 6 months or so, how many stories have come out about, for instance, BlackRock, Vanguard and State Street being amongst the top 10 institutional owners of all of these corporations.
Yeah.
And people go, and they have themselves said, in the mainstream media said, oh, but they just invest on behalf of their shareholders. And it's like, they are massive conglomerates, and you're literally looking at one vast monopoly of interests with a couple of hundred CEOs that are across all of those corporations, and then connected into powerful global policy shaping groups such as the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberger Group,
the World Economic Forum.
The World Economic Forum. Yeah. And there's plenty of them, and those are the think tanks that have that are funded by billionaires and billionaire foundations, and they plan years in advance, strategize, and they're all working together. So that answers, how does all the world's major and significant governments suddenly go along with resetting the world under the guise of a global pandemic? That we can get into that in another podcast.
So again, is there a chance for us to now reimagine things and make it in a way that there is a starting point for us to feel that, this is the starting point, let's do that. Like, for example, for me, there is the first thing we need to create parallel systems is the financial system, because everything lies upon that, right? If you don't create that basic sort of needs for people to be part of, then we will never have a space for other stuff to take place. So that's the first thing we need to change, right? Or adopt new parallel system to that. The other thing is how we live together. For example, in New Zealand, it's really hard to buy houses. So many of my friends now starting communities. Some of them going through a long process of discussions. What does that look like? And they haven't done anything.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them just like, we're just buying it because we want to have a sanctuary. And let's worry about the dilemmas later. So there's another approach.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not saying that one is right, better than the other, but I mean, we are in times that require action. We are in times that require from us to be courageous, to know that we're going to have conflicts, and let's deal with them. Let's agree how we deal with them. Maybe that's a nice way to start with, rather than trying to have the perfect plan for something or the perfect financial system for us to work with. It doesn't exist. It's all fruit of beautiful imagination. As you said, everyone brings their own biased viewpoints. There isn't such thing, in my opinion, objectivity. You're objective with your limits of your constructive mind, basically, based upon your experiences in life, your history, your emotions, your feelings. That's it. So you might think you're objective about something, but it's in your opinion only, including myself and everyone else, I guess. So, I mean, like, for example, how we can take this financial system and say, right, we're not going to fight the current one, but we will create something new. Like, if I will ask you, what does that look like to you, for example?
Well, that's a good question. There's probably multiple systems. I mean, that would be generally my approach. You know, I mean, because you can go online and look at time dollar systems or
Skills, time,
savings pools. And my general answer to all of these problems would be, it's more a conceptual thing. So, and you can apply it to across any sector. Say if you looked at a nation or a town or a city, it's different sectors that it needs, for want of a better term of describing how we define it, how we break up life into different professions and things. So say you're talking about what does a country need? It needs education, it needs a healthcare system, it needs transport and money system, political system, forestry, farming, fishery, industry or whatever. And so the key approach, I think, is to look at ask what would it take to make a society resilient, sustainable, genuinely sustainable, and I realize as I'm saying these terms they're fraught and they're loaded, and peaceful, so and then from there, like, go, what would what works about the current paradigm, the dominant paradigms for each of those professions and trades and sectors, and then go, what sucks about them, and then do the same for the alternative, for other paradigms and models and systems and projects, and so what I'm talking about really is people finding their tribe, of like, what are you passionate about, or what are your needs, say, in your particular town. Or it may be that your best contribution might be that you find people across the world by the internet or across the city, and say lots about the dominant paradigms of the health system and then other modalities, and you want to be part of a group that actually comes up with a project. And so the key thing with that concept is to ask what works by scale and by place and by its cultural setting. So what that does is, by asking that, it's like something that would work well in, I don't know, say a small town live in or something, would maybe work well there but suck in Auckland, or so that's how you can approach it.
Okay.
So it's a conceptual idea for like reimagining how to transform a society into a peaceful, resilient, dynamic place. So if that's your strategy, then that's what people need to think about. Is like, because people think, strategy, and then they start writing down all these steps for a plan. And that's not a strategy. A strategy is how do you influence an environment to transform it.
Okay.
That's how militarists think.
Yeah.
For them, so because they understand strategy.
That's right.
And this is what the global elite have done. They've worked out, how do we use these enormous transformative technologies. And I saw through doing my thesis on the global financial crisis and bank bailouts that in the beginning of the 70s, when the North Atlantic capitalist class were challenged, they had three major challenges. And to address those, they came up with a strategy. And the challenges were that they hadn't retooled in North America, and Europe had been rebuilt after the war in Japan, and so the American factories weren't they hadn't retooled, so they couldn't keep up competitively. And at the same time, in the 60s, you had all these people's movements of like going, we want more rights, for our, and that was a time when I think the political left actually they were sane back then. I think they've been gaslighted big time since. And they made a lot of sense back then. Since then, they've gotten too caught up in identity politics and haven't paid enough attention.
Ego and identity politics, for sure.
And not paying enough attention to what the global elites have been doing. So, and then the other major challenge they had was from and this is in the 60s and 70s, North Atlantic capitalist class was also majorly challenged by the developmentalist movement. So like people from third and second world countries whose resources had been used to rebuild Europe and Japan, particularly Africa, and they were demanding fair trade for their resources at the UN. And John F. Kennedy's friend Kwame Nkrumah, he wrote a great book called Neocolonialism: The Last Stage of Imperialism, and he laid out how Africa looked like it had its nominal independence. And what he showed was there was one vast monopoly that controlled all the industries, and he traced it to North American and European corporations and families, and that was 1965. His government was overthrown in a coup the next year. Like his friend JFK got assassinated in 1963 because he was literally challenging these forces, because he helped Kwame with one of these projects, like to build this massive dam to help provide electricity in West Africa.
To be sustainable and not reliant on others.
Yeah, because Kwame worked out that what countries had different resources and they could all trade with each other peacefully.
Like Gaddafi, in a way, when he I can not sympathize with many of his actions, but I can surely acknowledge the fact that he wanted to break free from that bullshit. And just in that same very year, there was the Arab Rising happened everywhere. So I mean, like,
well, there's a pattern there of like some of the dictators that go off script.
Yeah, that's right.
And then they either get assassinated or there's a fucking coup or something. Oh shit, I just...
Yeah. So again, I'm really keen to, I'm part of all sorts of different movements and communities that are seeking new ways of living, regenerative new ways of living, how we live on this planet. And again, recognizing the financial paradigm in which we live upon, that's the first thing. We need to create something parallel to it. And if I'm trying to be based about...
or maybe food systems
sure.
might be more immediate.
I agree with you. Food systems is more immediate. In a way, it's alongside with that, because food system at the moment, we still have the luxury of feeling that we're safe enough, especially in New Zealand. You know, unlike other places, in a week I'm going to visit Portugal, Spain, and Israel. Some of these places are urban living that if there is food crisis, they are doomed, to be honest. In New Zealand, we're one of the countries that we have luxury. So regardless of world food crisis, we live on poor people in South Auckland have a piece of land in their home that they actually grow something at the moment. Maybe not provide a full food factory. But I mean, we have a bit more luxury, better position than many other countries, and I feel like I see New Zealand as a great potential in leading by demonstration of new ways of living. If a couple of years ago I was hopeless and said, I need to kind of find different places, I feel a bit bored, I'm not too connected. I'm super passionate about being in New Zealand for that reason, because I feel despite my disagreement, I would say in a nice word, with the current government or governments, regardless if people think that the other color is going to provide a better color for society, that's all bullshit. Sorry guys, wake the fuck up. And if you don't, that's all right. There is the people that would lead these things. And sometimes, you know, we also kind of, I can get overwhelmed and think like, there is no hope because there is not enough people. But the thing is, there are enough people. You don't need everyone to adopt something. All you need is like avalanche. All you need is a tiny drop of something to start with a critical mass of people adopting that. And because people really, ultimately, most people really strive for good values. Most people are not evil people. That's a reality as well. And I mean, so now I'm really passionate. How can we create something in New Zealand that is going to be, now I see many communities are popping up. Many of my friends buying land together in different varieties of how it's set up. And I don't want to go there, but I mean, they're activating that. Now, how can we connect it with food? How can we connect it with what creates trust between people? Money is only form of trust, right? You can hate, Bin Laden hated America and vice versa, but they trade with dollars, with the same fucking dollar. Do you know what I mean? So I mean, like, I mean, they adopt the same thing in a way, right? So I feel like, how can we create something?
You've got that going on, you know, big time with, you know, the major countries, you know, forming these digital central bank currencies.
Right? And you mentioned a few resets along the history. The last one is actually, they call it the Great Reset. They're not even hiding it. I'm highly recommending you guys to read a book by Klaus Schwab, which is the World Economic Forum, I don't know if I call it leader, but he's the guy that represents the World Economic Forum. He co-founded it. And he wrote a book, funny enough, just as the pandemic started, COVID-19, the Great Reset, which to me, I don't know, you wrote some thesis and stuff like that. Writing something requires a deep sort of contemplation and information.
It came out in
came
out in June 2020.
In June, I think it came up slightly before that, but maybe June. I mean,
June, or at least they did their big announcement, Great Reset, at the beginning of June 2020.
So it came out very close to
very quick,
very quick. And when I read the book, I was like, I don't know, these things don't come up in a month or two. To be frankly honest, it's not like, oh shit, now it's happened, let's talk about it. And some of the ideas over there, they painted, as we discussed before, you know, there is some level of, in every information we provide, there is a level of truth and there is a level of fiction, of lie or deceit, or some ideas that make people start think of, oh shit, what's going to happen? When I read the book, I was concerned. And also, Klaus Schwab coined the sentence that by 2030, you will own nothing and you will be happy. I ended up emailing him directly on LinkedIn. And I said, I'd love to reconsider my viewpoint about you if you're going to publicly announce and change the concept of your sentence to, we will own nothing in 2030 and we will be happy. If you include yourself in that sentence, I might try and have conversation and believe you to your intentions, right? But obviously I didn't get any reply. In fact, I got intimidation by LinkedIn that I'm not okay to I think they used some abuse or whatever that is.
Really? You did it via LinkedIn?
I did via LinkedIn as well. I also emailed one time.
And you didn't get a reply by
Justin Trudeau. I'm sorry, I'm not going to even go there, but I got really upset with some of the scenes that I saw in Canada. But I mean, like, I'm keen to see. Okay, there is money system at the moment. It's controlled by private families. It doesn't really matter who they are because I don't care anymore. I know that this is what it is. I know we've been enslaved for this system since ever, and I'm keen to now. There is enough people to adopt something new, and I find the most challenging is to try and agree what does that mean. And so, I mean, like, if I'm going to try and have conversation of the cultural background of a community to try and adopt something, and then I find that we can get sucked into discussions and you know, I'll take even indigenous in New Zealand. They are really strong about their belief, the cultural background, the traditions, and I'm in a space that I want to break all of that. I want to break all the traditions, all the beliefs, and just say, great, go for it. Live your life with it. You know, I respect it. And I respect you holding really tight these traditions and beliefs and all these imaginary concepts in which you construct your daily life every day. But I'm keen to have a start point in which we say, that's what we need to create. This is how it is. Let's start working with it. For example, if I'll take money, right? We can create a decentralized digital currency that is not even operating like Bitcoin or all of them, because it's all the same in a way, works in the same system as it is at the moment, and have like a variety of options for people to choose from, whether it's skills, time, exchange of something, whether it's currency, digital, whatever. Allow people to have access to universal basic income that is not given by government, but is given by that sort of digital system in which we can create, like, you know, people create cryptocurrency by creating a currency, have airdrop of it based on different coding and principles and values in which they decide how much it's been created against what, whether it's usability, whether it's people mining it, whether it's people sharing that with other friends. We can create anything we like, really. We can create a currency that it's going to be created based on the human right, birthright to be free, to be open, to have great values, to share things in your community. So I mean, like, what tangible ideas do we have? And give examples to communities. So in Raglan, friends of mine live there. They have time bank. They have money pool. Is it something like that? You know, savings pool. And now they do Skillshare. They even now toying with the idea, and correct me if I'm wrong, my Raglan family, about creating their own currency in Raglan. So I mean, like,
cool, like a paper currency, or
I'm not sure, maybe digital, some form of something like that. And I feel like I'm keen to create some tangible ideas for people, give like options, 2-3 options, whatever, and let's start adopting something in different places. So maybe in Raglan they're going to start this, and then in Kerikeri, in Bay of Islands, this, or in other places something different, but it can be linked, because we can all agree that we can we're still in that sort of mindset and condition of you need to exchange something, right? In that sort of form of mentality. This is how we work at the moment. So we can definitely accept that, okay, this guy's adopting saving pool and time bank, and these guys are digital currency is more strong for them. And we can actually link all of these things, right? Because that's what's important, to be able to have global adaptation of something, critical mass, is to be able to link them. So if only I'm going to do something in my marae or in my environment and it's not connected to somewhere else, the ones that currently operating everything else, they are super connected. And they are super connected through the financial system. They are super connected through the banking system that holds people, you know, in Canada, they froze people's bank account that been in the protest. Then what do we do? How are they going to purchase food, rent, whatever that is? That's in Canada. I'm not talking about China or North Korea or whatever. And I feel like
it's a great warning.
It is a great warning. And if this is not a warning to you, mates in New Zealand, what is a warning then? Because New Zealand and Canada are very much similar in that regards. Up to 2 years ago, they were the well sought after countries to live, safe, kind, all this kind of identity that we created for these countries that ended up being really failing in the crunch time. And Canada was deeper failure than New Zealand, but I think New Zealand also showed up to it really well in that regard. So I mean, like, I'm super keen to try and see what are tangible, demonstrative ideas we can start adopting and say, right, we have technology, we can also create an independent currency that is not related to one of these guys. That the principles and values and the creation of it is going to be against human values. It's going to be against birthright of everyone to be alive, to have access to basic needs, as an example, right? Could be many things. But I feel there is a point in which we can agree. Everyone, regardless of what spectrum they are in the ideological, imaginary concepts, whatever beliefs and stuff, can agree that we need to have basic needs, food, met. Everyone needs to eat, drink, have some affection, have some contact, be acknowledged, regardless. And you can disagree about my God and your God, and but we can agree upon that. So if a currency is connected to that, we definitely agree that it's how it can be created, for example. And I feel we in time that we must harness something and have the discussions alongside that and adopt and evolve something based on that, rather than trying to start something based on the perfect solution for all, because that doesn't exist.
Well, so that's what you're getting to is it's the basic it's the error that humanity has fallen for in every epoch, in every nation or every time period, is this idea that there's one right way to live. Because
that's right.
So there's a book called Beyond Civilization written by Daniel Hill, and
Beyond Civilization. Okay.
Humanity's Next Great Adventure, and it's a really simple book. He wrote it after writing a novel, which the name of the novel escapes me right now. Anyway, and so what he gets across in this book, the key thing is that civilization as we've known it, his idea of it is that it's a conceptual thing. It's not the pipes and the wiring and the bridges, because you can still have all of that. And he's not saying therefore we should just destroy it all, because it happen to be really useful things. He's getting across the idea that the key idea of civilization is that there is one right way to live, and we've been trained as humans to go along with it. And so he's talking about hierarchical systems where the people self-appointed at the top tell everyone else how to live, and obviously develop sophisticated systems of punishment and rewards, and so every time period when there's these massive transformations, it's these ruling groups that get together and strategize how to harness the new technologies to maintain social control. And so that's not a strange concept for people to get. It's probably the most, if people are watching this go, oh yeah, no, I can get that, and so and then what happens is when things get really when those vested interests really start looking after their own interests, and they're literally taking too much of the surplus, whether it's the money or it's the resources or the best food, whatever it is, and then that's when people are really suffering, and that's what we're going through. right now, and pretty much the West is, what I'm saying is the West is starting to feel that when it's been inflicted upon vast swaths of the planet where white people don't live, essentially, since World War II.
Yeah.
Like in particular, I mean, basically, I'm not saying there wasn't, horrendous things happening in the colonial empires, but then they shifted back to the core of the empire and had massive 2 global wars in Europe, and then after that, as we know, like they went right Southeast Asia, and then they stood up Africa and South America, and so people need to get their heads around this idea that white Western elites wouldn't do bad things to white Western people. It's basically everything is coming home to roost, and they literally do. White Western elites are they're pretty damn evil. They've done evil things across the world.
I feel none of the people that actually were part of something that created havoc and destruction and hatred and separation between people, none of these people actually care about the similar culture that they might hold with some other group of people, whether you're a Jew, Muslim, or whatever that is. The motive and the roots of your existence, of why you do what you do, it's what connects these people, regardless of whether they are wearing some cultural identity that might be, but he's this, so he's definitely not going to hurt the same people. Yeah. That's not really what matters at the end of it. But
and I just want to make another point so people don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that being evil is just a white Western thing for elites.
That's right.
It's across every culture.
Exactly.
But they happen to be the dominant factions, and there's a massive joust for power going on in the world, and essentially, in a nutshell, it's this global monopoly board the rules are changing, and there's a fight for more squares between who gets, basically it's a fight over who controls the most squares and the new monetary system, and all of it, this is a key thing to remember, is like what happens to the instrument of expansion. So every empire needs an instrument of expansion, and the defining thing in every age of conflict is what happens to that instrument of expansion. So classical times, slavery was your instrument of expansion, and then the forms of slavery got more, sophisticated over time.
That never changed, by the way.
They just gets dressed up as different things.
It dresses up
looks cosmetically better.
Absolutely. It's like the difference between democracy and communism is all the same ultimately. It's the same centralized power. Ultimately, it's painted differently. So people can feel good about it to some degree more than others, but ultimately they are all exactly the same things.
So and then the credit revolution, has been like, that was a new instrument of expansion because that financed the colonial empires. And then industrial, technology became the machines became the new instrument of expansion. So why things are so tumultuous now is because it's a fight to control the resources and the territories over the new instrument of expansion, which is the chip. Computing chip.
The computing chip.
So what happens with that computing chip? Who controls the resources and the territories for those to make those computing chips and the technologies around it is why the world is going through such major transformations. Because they're all in agreement. All the major world powers are, so China, Russia, and America are reforging their empires, and they're all in agreement over the new systems. That it's going to be this central bank systems.
Surveillance.
So even the BRICS, if they develop this BRICS central, their credit currency,
social credit currency.
They're still going to be exchanging through the digital, with eeach other, with the NATO alliance one or whatever it is,
Yeah.
So, and then this mass surveillance system that was, like just went up by levels of magnitude after 9/11, and then again with the pandemic being called.
It's a gradual
into a biosecurity system, and so we're talking about the control of humanity through digital tracking, tracing, ticketing,
surveillance, absolutely.
everything,
social credit,
so that
control currency.
Yeah. So the implications for people, and I think this is probably an important thing to get across to people what this really means, because it gets into every household. If you have like this total surveillance system, which is being rolled out as we speak, and it's being built by we're all got a part in it. We've all like all of us having cell phones, we've literally helped finance it by buying cell phones.
Absolutely.
and the like.
Can you hear me?
And so I can describe like overall what that will do to humanity if we let it happen. So what's at stake? Why does this really matter? If you have a total surveillance system, which is where they're going, it'll be a few short steps where privacy is totally lost. Because if you've got your smart meter in your home, let's just just transmitting data to the power company, you just wanted power, but no, it's actually able to track how many people are in the house through all the appliances
Sure.
that are hooked up to the internet. So if you totally lose privacy, then what they're planning is to bring through some sort of social credit scoring system like they have with China. And
it's already happening in China, by the way. It's nothing.
Well, it's set. It's basically in large parts of China, you can't transact without your cell phone.
That's right.
So you totally lose your anonymity to be able to transact, which is at least something you have with cash. And so and if you think I'm like being crazy, going China won't happen here, well, Noam Chomsky was talking about this in 2018, going you want to pay attention to what's happening with China because that's being built up with Western technology and Western companies, and it's it's something that Edward Snowden's talked about as well. So
and when you say that it's not going to happen here, I just mentioned earlier on what's happened in Canada. So
yeah,
it does happen here.
You protest, the government doesn't agree with you.
Yeah,
and you may not have agreed with what they were protesting about in Canada, but what happens when it's another government and they don't like what you're passionate about?
Exactly.
So if you lose, if they bring in some sort of version of a social credit system in the West, which that's where it's heading, like either a combination of compliance behavior, associated with how well you behave during a pandemic, or with climate change, to earn your carbon credits, all those kinds of things. What essentially governments are doing and these global elites are planning is behavior modification of humanity. So once that starts happening, what you lose is free will. And once you lose free will, or just before you lose free will, or as that's happening as a process, what it does is it means there's less spontaneous behavior going on. So you lose who you are. You stop doing you.
Yeah.
And I stop doing me. And so then why that's critical is because once you lose the ability to be who you are and be spontaneous, then real love starts to die, because the essential thing about love is that it resists being regulated, right?
That's right.
You know,
Yeah.
you know that from being in a relationship. If you start telling your partner like how to behave too much, you know, she's going to get pissed with you.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Some cultures, they're a bit limited in that sort of thing, but I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Love
yeah.
is open. Love
Yeah.
is unlimited.
Yeah.
Love is almost unable to describe that because it's so open and vast.
Yeah. So then this gets to the really interesting thing about what's going on. So all of these systems that have been developed, you can look this up. You can read my article, Letters to the Future from the Time of the Crazy, the first letter, how the world is going to hell in a Corona handbasket. Towards the end of that, I show how, for instance, BlackRock is part of this climate partnership initiative. And they've earmarked that what's needed to transform the world to make it more sustainable is going to take 100 trillion in investment, which sounds like an awful lot of ground to dig up to get the minerals to make this smart algorithm, tracked world where we can trace all the resources everyone's using. And so if you think about that, 100 trillion investment to redesign the world to a high-tech trajectory, all to make it sustainable and to mitigate climate change. So there's a lot of mining to get at the minerals. Most of those minerals are in the Stan's area of Eurasia. So that's a lot of destabilization of populations and mass migration, and a lot of wars, and a lot of plunder. So then to get to what is really going on with that, with this idea of essentially what I'm saying is love resists regulation. It takes an enormous amount of resources to control human love and to tell people there's one right way to live.
Yeah. You woke up tomorrow morning in a parallel universe, right? You are extremely surprised in what you see. It's something new. And it's, in your viewpoint, the perfect world. What does that look like?
Wow.
In a very sort of...
25 words or less.
Yeah, not 25 words, could be a bit longer, but what's the feel of it? How does that feel?
It feels inspiring and like very unrestrained in the possibilities. Like confidence. There's confidence. People have a swagger.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to wrap things up with that. People have a swagger.
People have a swagger. I want to see that return.
I want to see that return as well. You couldn't actually come up with something better than that. I thought it's going to be a bit, okay, well, and that...
20 minutes later, Steve.
Yes, please, can we bring that back again? And I trust we can.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So
otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here. I would be like caving myself somewhere, planting trees and trying to have my own food. I mean, like, I trust it.
Yeah, so do I.
So
love is the most powerful thing.
It is, and it will prevail.
It's more powerful and fair, and the only thing that they have control over is hope as well. Like they try and steer things in a direction where they regulate hope.
So let's bring that swagger vibes and moves, and if possible. I really want to thank you. It was, we can go longer, and I'd love to have you back again and revisit some of the stuff we discussed, and people can check up some of the content that you provide on your website, which I'm going to put on the link and when I'm going to share the podcast, so people can find out more about different things that you're passionate about to share with people in a way that doesn't necessarily blame as such, but just conveying a message that this is how it is at the moment, and I'm keen to to start having conversations and implementation of new ways actually parallel to these ones, and let's bring the swagger back, because it's becoming a bit kind of overwhelming, too much for too many people. I love you, ladies and gentlemen. I love you for joining and bringing yourself up to it.
Thank you, Isaac. Yeah, it's been fun. It's been good.
Likewise.
Yeah.
I'll see you soon.
Cool.
See you soon. And share your comments, your vibes, your thoughts. You're welcome. Lots of love. That was really nice.